Welcome back to my channel, everyone. I'm Charles from Charles Eng Photography, and thanks for tuning in. About a month ago, I bought the Nikon D90 with a 50mm f1.8 Nikon lens for around $350, and I stated how a good buy it was. Today I don't want to talk about the Nikon D90, I want to talk about the lens that came with it, the Nikon 50mm f1.8 D version. Now there are two 50mm versions of this lens. There is the D version and the G version. The G can be used on just about any Nikon camera. The D version cannot be used, but both are just as sharp as the other. I just want to talk and show you a few sample photos that I've taken with the f1.8 D version. Now because it is a D version lens, you need a camera that has a screw mounted motor on it. So the Nikon D3000 series, the Nikon D5000 series, you will not be able to use autofocus, but you can still use it in manual focus. That is up to you if you want it. For example, the D90, the D7000, 7100, 7500, the D500, you will be able to use this lens with it, and also all the full frame cameras. And this lens now, you can pick it up for around $150 brand new, or around $80, $90 second hand. Now, I had this lens years ago when I was doing some portrait photography, and it was so good because I could get down to f1.8, because this is why a lot of people buy this lens. Now, there is a bit of a caveat, because I've found that using this lens at f1.8 is very tricky, because your depth of field is so narrow that if you don't nail your focus, then like if you're aiming for the eye and you're just slightly off and you hit the nose, then the eye at f1.8 will be slightly blurred. It won't be pin sharp. Most of the time I was just using this lens at f2.8. And at f2.8, you've just got about corner to corner sharpness on this lens. And by the time you get to around f4, it is just pin sharp. But if you're really trying to get the least amount of depth of field possible in this lens, then stick to f1.8. I'd love to be able to show you what it looks like on the model, but the only model that I could find is my daughter, and with YouTube regulations and all that, it's such a big can of worms that I just left that alone. What I will show you is some photos I took around the house with this lens between f1.8 and f11. Now this is the first set here. This is two little souvenirs that I bought, and you can see here now these were all taken on a tripod, and the focus point was the nose of the first little kangaroo with the hat on. So we're going to go f1.8, f4, f5.6, f8 and then f11, and watch the amount of blur that we lose as we go up in aperture. So you'll see the background becoming sharper and sharper in the photos. So here we start at f1.8, we go to f2.8, then we go to f4, then f5.6, then f8 and f11. You notice how much difference f1.8 to f11 makes? So this is f1.8, and I'll split the screen here now. The bottom half of the image is at f1.8 and the top half is at f11. Even if we go between f1.8 and f4, you can see the difference in your depth of field. And this is why it's so advantageous to use a shallow depth of field. Why do portrait photographers love using a lens with a rating of f2.8? Because they can just blur out the background. So even if you've got like a very busy background a couple of meters away, you'll just smooth that background out. And here's another example of depth of field between f1.8 and f11. These are aluminium flowers nailed up on our brick wall, and I've angled the camera. I can really distinguish between the foreground and background. This was taken at f1.8, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8 and f11. And again, if we split the screen, the lower half is f1.8 and the top half at f11. You can see the huge difference. I will split the screen again between f1.8 and f2.8. There is a difference, but just a subtle difference. And really, if you're using this lens, most of the time you should just be comfortable using it at f2.8 unless you really want very minimal depth of field. Because if you're photographing a person and you're using it at f2.8, you're going to have very minimal amount of the face in focus. This is why you're much better off just staying at f2.8 and you're going to get a much sharper image than at f1.8. Some people say that you shouldn't photograph at all at f1.8 because the whole image is going to be soft. I disagree with that, because if you nail focus at f1.8, your center of the image is going to be sharp. Remember, f1.8, you've got very little depth of field, and this is where people will complain saying, well, it's not sharp, because the amount that is in focus on your subject is so small that they'll be looking around and go like, oh yeah, well, it's a bit blurred, it's a bit soft. Well, of course it is, because you've only got a few millimeters of depth of field. If you've missed a focus point, let's say if you're aiming for the eye and you've missed it, like I said before, and you land on the nose, then the eyebrow will be soft, and they're not going to blame themselves. They're going to say, well, it's the lens. Take a look at these two images taken at f1.8 and f2.8 of the Nikon D90. This one is at f1.8. This one is at f2.8. I'm going to crop right in because my focus point was the Nikon badge on the camera. And look at the difference between f1.8 and f2.8. The name Nikon is sharp in both of these images. Nailing your focus, you're going to get sharp images. This set of images shows you the difference between 18 mils, 24, 35 and 50 mils, and why the 50 mil is so restrictive when you come to photographing outside. And this image is taken at 18 mils. This next image is taken at 24. This one here is taken at 35. This image here is taken at 50 mils. Now I was using my 18 to 140 millimeter lens, but whether I was at 50 mils on this lens or 50 mils using the 50 mil f1.8, I'm going to get the same field of view. This lens is great for photographing people, for photographing flowers, where you really just want to concentrate on a small area, but not good for landscapes because your view is so narrowed down. So would I recommend you buy this lens as part of your photography kit? Sure, for around $100 secondhand, it is a great lens. Understand there's limitations to it. If you can't afford a macro lens, then this lens is so good because you could easily get a set of extension tubes and use it as a macro lens because you could get so close to a subject. Remember, if you're using the Nikon D3000 series or the Nikon D5000 series, you won't have autofocus, so you will have to manually focus. If you have the Nikon D3000 series or the 5000 series, then I would recommend you look at the f1.8 G version, because this lens will work on those cameras. Now, if you found value in this video, give me a big thumbs up. Stay safe, enjoy your photography, and I'll see you next time.